There's a certain kind of friend you have to watch for, the one who never seems to say anything outright cruel, but somehow you walk away feeling smaller every time you're around them. The passive aggressor doesn't yell, doesn't cuss you out, doesn't even seem overtly angry. Instead, they slip their barbs in sideways. They lace their words with sarcasm, roll their eyes at your enthusiasm, and hide their resentment behind the thin veil of a joke. You might hear them say, "Oh, look at you, trying to be important," with that crooked little smile that's supposed to soften the blow. But it doesn't. It stings, because it reveals a truth they won't admit, that they don't really celebrate you, they resent you. The danger with the passive aggressor is how subtle they are. You second-guess your own perception. You tell yourself you're being too sensitive, or maybe you misunderstood their intentions. You tell yourself you're being too critical. You tell yourself you're being too crowded. You tell yourself you're being too protective. You tell yourself you're being too crowded. 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 You tell yourself that's what makes this kind of friendship so toxic. It thrives in confusion and self-doubt. You start walking on eggshells, measuring every word you say, trying not to trigger another sarcastic jab. You water yourself down just to keep the peace. And before long, you've lost the boldness that once made you feel alive. These are the friends who will smile in your face when you're down, pretending to offer comfort. But the moment you find your footing again, they'll be the first to knock you off balance. They cannot stand to see you rising above the limitations they've accepted for themselves. So, they sabotage you with faint praise and hidden scorn. They'll say, "Wow, I never thought you'd actually pull that off," as if your success were an accident. But hear this. You were not created to shrink to fit someone else's comfort zone. You were not here to mute your light, to make insecure people feel safe. The passive aggressor will drain your spirit if you keep letting them sit at your table. Their words are poison, disguised as concern. Their jokes are daggers wrapped in velvet. And no matter how much you explain or reason with them, they won't change, because passive aggression isn't about you. It's about their own refusal to take responsibility for what they feel. If you want to protect your peace, you have to be willing to step back from anyone who makes you question your worth. You have to draw a line that says, "I will not keep company with those who cannot be honest about their resentment." Because the truth is, life is too short to spend it with people who can't clap when you win. When you finally release the passive aggressor, you'll feel something you haven't felt in a long time: relief. And that relief is the first sign you're finally free. You know the one I'm talking about. The friend who never seems to catch a break, whose every day is a crisis, whose every relationship is a betrayal. At first, you want to help. You listen with compassion, offer your shoulder, your time, your prayers. You believe that maybe if you love them enough, they'll heal. But the chronic victim doesn't want healing. They want sympathy without accountability. They want your energy without ever taking a step toward change. This friend will tell you over and over again that life is unfair, that people are always out to get them. And if you try to offer a different perspective, if you gently suggest that maybe their choices have played a part in their pain, they'll shut you down. Because in their world, they are never responsible. Responsibility feels too heavy for them to carry, so they place that burden on everyone around them. And if you let them, they will gladly let you carry it for as long as you're willing. What you don't realize at first is that this constant tide of complaints and crises slowly seeps into your spirit. You start to feel exhausted every time your phone lights up with their name. You begin to dread the conversations because you know it will never be about anything good. You'll never hear about growth or gratitude or lessons learned. Just the same old stories on repeat, the same helpless tone, the same refusal to rise. There's a quiet cost to keeping a chronic victim in your life. You start to feel guilty for your own progress. You catch yourself dimming your joy because you don't want to seem insensitive. You hesitate to share your blessings because you know it will trigger another wave of self-pity. And slowly, almost without noticing, you start living smaller so they don't feel left behind. But understand this, your compassion cannot become a prison. Your kindness is not a license for someone to drain you endlessly. True friendship requires reciprocity, a willingness to grow together. When you find yourself giving and giving while the other person refuses to take even the smallest step toward change, you have to ask yourself if this is really friendship or just a one-sided arrangement designed to keep you stuck. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and let them sit with their own choices. Because until they're willing to take ownership of their life, nothing you say or do will ever be enough. You can't rescue someone who's committed to staying in the role of the victim. And you can't sacrifice your peace to prove your loyalty. The moment you release that burden, you'll feel the weight lift off your shoulders. And you will feel that burden, you feel that load lift off your shoulders. Let the moment fade, and then see what passage takes you on the ride. That's where the pain, the curse, and the fearful night will call to you and be visited by you. That's where the pain, the curse, and the fearful night will call to you and be visited by you. And you realize that you were never meant to carry what was never yours to hold. There's a kind of friend who shows up only when it benefits them. You'll notice it in the little ways first. The sudden friendliness when they need a ride, the warm messages when they're short on money, the flattery when they want an introduction to someone you know. They have a way of making you feel needed, even special, because for a moment, you're the answer to their problem. But when you look closer, you see the pattern. When you don't have anything to offer, they disappear. When you need support, they're too busy. And when you reach out just to connect, there's no reply. The opportunist is skilled at wearing the mask of friendship. They'll tell you how much you mean to them, how grateful they are, how they don't know what they'd do without you. But watch what happens when you draw a boundary. Watch how fast the warmth turns cold when you say no. That's when you see the truth. Their loyalty was never to you. It was to the access, the favors, the resources. You were just a convenient stop on their path to whatever they wanted next. What makes this so damaging is how it conditions you to question your own generosity. You start wondering if everyone has an angle. You hesitate to help others, afraid of being used again. The opportunist doesn't just take your time or your money, they take your trust. They teach you to guard your heart a little more tightly, to close the doors that were once open without question. But here's what you have to remember. Helping people isn't the problem. Generosity isn't the issue. The problem is allowing yourself to be manipulated by someone who never intended to stand by you when the tables turned. A real friend doesn't keep score. A real friend shows up when there's nothing to gain. They remember your birthdays, your struggles, your dreams, not just your usefulness. So pay attention to who claps when you have nothing to offer. Pay attention to who stays when you're empty-handed. because the opportunist can only survive in your life if you keep feeding them. The moment you stop providing, you'll see their true colors, clear as daylight. Sometimes it hurts to admit that someone you cared about was only ever around for their own benefit. But pretending otherwise won't change reality. You deserve connections built on respect and mutual support, not transactions and hidden agendas. And when you finally choose to cut off the opportunist, you create space for real friendships to take root. Relationships that don't require you to keep proving your worth. You'll find that when you no longer tolerate being used, you begin to attract people who value you simply for who you are. There's a special kind of false friend who pretends to be your biggest supporter, but somehow every moment that should be yours ends up being about them. You'll recognize the spotlight thief by the way they always manage to center themselves in your story. Share good news, and they'll immediately pivot to their own achievements. Share your struggles, and they'll find a way to make it about their hardships. You might not notice it at first, because they're so skilled at cloaking their insecurity in humor or concern. But over time, you start to feel like a background character in your own life. When you accomplish something meaningful, you hope for genuine celebration. You look for that friend who will look you in the eyes and say, "I'm proud of you," without conditions, without comparisons. But with the spotlight thief, your success is a threat. It's a mirror, reflecting back to them all the places they feel inadequate. Instead of acknowledging that feeling and dealing with it, they mask it by stealing your moment. They'll interrupt your story to remind you of their own victories, or subtly imply that your progress isn't that impressive. At first, you may think you're imagining it. You might question whether you're just being selfish for wanting to be celebrated without competition. But the truth is, healthy friendships thrive on mutual uplift. There is room enough for everyone to shine. A real friend knows that your success doesn't diminish theirs. A real friend feels secure enough to let you have your moment without hijacking it. What makes this dynamic so draining is how it gradually chips away at your enthusiasm. You start holding back your excitement because you don't want to trigger their defensiveness. You stop sharing your dreams because you're tired of being talked over. You dull your shine so they can feel comfortable. And in doing so, you abandon parts of yourself that deserve to be honored. It takes courage to confront this pattern. You might worry that by speaking up, you'll be accused of arrogance or selfishness. But you have every right to be seen and heard in your own life. You have every right to expect reciprocity in your relationships. You have every right to expect reciprocity in your relationships. You have every right to expect reciprocity in your relationship. You don't have to apologize for outgrowing someone who refuses to celebrate you. When you step back from the spotlight thief, you reclaim your energy. You remember what it feels like to share your milestones without bracing for judgment or competition. And you learn to surround yourself with people who aren't threatened by your growth, who can stand beside you in the light instead of trying to steal it away. The moment you choose to honor your own story, you begin to attract the kind of friendships that feel safe, affirming, and real. There's a type of friend who seems to know everything about everyone. They always have the inside scoop, the whispered secrets, the shocking details about people you barely know. At first, it can feel exciting to be in their confidence. You feel like you're part of some exclusive circle, trusted with information no one else gets to hear. But over time, that excitement turns sour because the gossip dealer doesn't just trade in harmless stories. They thrive on tearing others down to feel important. You'll start to notice that their updates rarely come from a place of concern or compassion. They'll pretend they're only sharing because they care, but their tone betrays something darker, a satisfaction in other people's failures. And as you listen, a little voice inside you will start to wonder, if they talk this way about everyone else, what do they say about me when I'm not around? That question alone is reason enough to pay attention. It's easy to convince yourself that you're just being polite, that listening isn't the same as participating. But when you sit quietly while someone dismantles another person's reputation, you become complicit. You let that poison seep into your spirit. You start to look at people through the lens of suspicion, assuming the worst before you know the facts. Little by little, the gossip dealer shapes how you see the world. Cynical, distrustful, always expecting betrayal. The other danger is that this friend often masks their habit as honesty. They'll say, "I'm just telling it like it is," or "someone had to say it." But the truth is, gossip has never been about honesty. It's about control. It's about feeling powerful enough to hold someone else's story in your hands. And it's about distracting themselves from their own shortcomings by highlighting everyone else's flaws. If you're not careful, you'll find yourself drawn deeper into their web. You'll start sharing things you shouldn't, just to keep the connection alive. You'll compromise your integrity to stay in their good graces, because you've seen what happens to people who cross them. But understand this, no relationship is worth the price of your character. The moment you decide to walk away from the gossip dealer, you reclaim something essential, your peace. You stop worrying about who said what. You stop feeling the need to defend yourself from invisible attacks, and you learn to build relationships rooted in trust, not in shared contempt for others. If you want to live with integrity, you have to be willing to stand apart from the crowd that feeds on rumor and speculation. You have to protect your spirit from the kind of negativity that leaves everyone a little more bitter and a little more alone. And when you finally choose to distance yourself, you'll find the quiet relief of knowing that no one has to be torn down for you to feel whole. I say that competence is not a real thing. There are other excellent qualities. 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 There's a kind of friend whose voice is always the first to chime in when you dare to dream out loud. You'll recognize the vision shrinker by the way their eyes narrow when you share your plans, the way their tone shifts from polite interest to quiet dismissal. You can hear it in the words they choose. Are you sure that's realistic? Don't get your hopes up. Not everyone is cut out for that. They wear the mask of practicality, but what they're really doing is projecting their own limitations onto you. The vision shrinker isn't always malicious. Sometimes they genuinely believe they're protecting you from disappointment. They might even tell you they're just trying to be honest. But you have to understand that not every opinion deserves a seat at the table where your future is being built. Someone who's never stepped beyond the boundaries of their comfort zone has no authority to tell you what's possible. The danger of the vision shrinker is how persuasive they can be. You respect them. You may have known them for years. So when they question your ambition, you start questioning it too. You start scaling back your plans so they don't think you're naive. You start softening your language, saying things like, "It's just an idea," or "We'll see," so you don't have to defend your hope. Little by little, you convince yourself it's safer to expect nothing than to risk failing at something big. That's how dreams die, not all at once, but in tiny moments when you agree to make them smaller for someone else's comfort. You trade your vision for accept, your passion for approval. And long after the vision shrinker has moved on to criticize someone else's plans, You're left sitting in the rubble of the life you were too afraid to build. But hear me when I say this. You don't owe anyone an explanation for wanting more. You don't need permission to outgrow the limitations you were raised in. You don't have to apologize for believing you were made for something bigger than the status quo. Your dreams are valid. You were made for something bigger. Your dreams are valid. You were made for something bigger. Your dreams are valid simply because they belong to you. If you want to honor your potential, you have to get comfortable with disappointing people who are committed to staying small. You have to be willing to let them misunderstand you, because the alternative is to look back one day and realize you spent your whole life trying to earn the approval of people who never had the courage to believe in themselves. The day you stop letting the vision shrinker dictate the size of your dreams is the day you start living in alignment with who you really are. And when you finally walk away from their doubt, you'll discover how powerful it feels to stand tall in your own possibility.